Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book-to-show comparison for the Expanse Season 1, Episode 2, The Big Empty. This video is a part of a series of videos where I compare episodes of the TV show The Expanse to the novel series on which it is based and point out the differences and whether or not I felt these differences worked or improved upon the source material. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for The Expanse up to the end of Season 1. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain spoilers for the show past Season 2 for those of you who haven't read the novel series. However, it will spoil what occurs in the first two novels that cover Season 1. Also, I am not an expert on the novels. I'm just a guy who read them recently and wants to examine the differences between them in the show, so I may miss out a few things or get a few things wrong from time to time, but I will try my best. So we start episode 2 with a flashback to when Holden first met Ade, but she then all of a sudden says, "Holden, there's something I need to tell you," and then everything flashes white, and we go to Holden on the night in present times, but he's awake, so it wasn't a dream, maybe it was a daydream, I don't know. But nothing like this happened in the books. As I mentioned in episode 1, Holden's relationship with Ade wasn't as intimate as it is in the show, and I did see that was a plus. So I also think this scene is an improvement, as well as it adds a lot of emotional weight to the destruction of the Canterbury, and this was really effectively creepy, so I'm going to give this a +3. In present times, though, the night is too close to where the Canterbury blew up, so it's in danger of a debris field, and the crew have to deal with high G's as Alex tries to evade this debris field, but isn't completely successful as some debris hits the ship and ends up causing damage. This sets in motion the main storyline for Holden and his group for this episode, but none of this happened in the books. In the novels, the night was at a safe distance from the Canterbury when it exploded. In fact, it was quite far away, as a matter of fact, and the whole storyline that spins from this point, I think, is unnecessary and just there to add tension to the episode, but doesn't really serve a purpose, and I see it more as filler, so -2. Next, Holden tells Alex to follow the ship that attacked the Canterbury, but Naomi and Amos yell at him not to, as they are sure that the ship will just blow them up if they try to follow them. Alex isn't so sure what to do, so Holden shoves him out of the way in order to do it himself, but Naomi shuts the engines down and Holden is pissed off and gets right up in her face. Okay, so none of this happened in the books either, and frankly I see it as pointless melodrama. In the books, Holden does insist on going after the ship, but Naomi quietly sets him aside, tells him that he's not doing it, and tells him why. He's mad at first, but then he sees her point of view and he stands down. What's also very different about the scene is when Alex wouldn't listen to Holden. He says, "I gave you an order," to which Amos replies, "Oh, you think rank matters now?" indicating he's clearly taking Naomi's side. Whereas in the novels, not only did Amos never express any doubt about the chain of command or give any indication that he wouldn't follow Holden's orders, but in this case he actively agreed with Holden's decision to go after the ship. I believe the exact phrase he used was "fucking A." In fact, in addition to wanting to follow the ship, Holden actually sends a transmission to the ship calling them murdering bastards, and also sent them a complete manifest of the Canterbury so they know exactly who it was they killed, his hopes being that it would keep them up at night. He also vows to ensure that they will go down for what they did. The stealth ship didn't take too kindly to this and targeted them with their laser but never fired. And then Holden wanted to follow them. And honestly, I like the book's version of events much better, so I'm going to give this a -3. Next, we go back to Miller on Ceres, and we get a lot of talk about how precious water is on Ceres as Miller's taking a shower and runs out of water, and then he talks to a random belter about how Earth is, purposely shorting them water in order to screw them. Nothing like this happens in the novels. Yes, water was seen as a precious commodity in the belt, but no talk of Earth purposely withholding water from them was ever explored. And again, this sets up for a filler storyline that wasn't in the book, so -1. Next, we get a scene of Miller going to investigate Julie Mao by searching her room. Now, this is very similar to a scene in the books, but in the books, this doesn't happen until a bit later in the story. And I don't recall Miller using this device he uses here, where he talks into the device and it repeats what he says with Julie's voice, which allows him to look at her file. So I thought this was actually a nice touch. So he looks at a message from her father who scolds her for running off to the belt on one of her crusades, and he threatens to sell her racing ship, the Razorback. Then he watches a reply from Julie where she tells her father that he doesn't understand her and to go right ahead and sell her ship, and what she's doing in the belt is more important. Now, this is very similar to the books, but in the books the message was in text, not a video, and it was from her mother, not her father. And Julie had drafted 3 replies in response, one being very upset and calling her mother selfish and heartless, another where she tries to be kind and reason with her mother, but she never sent either of those messages. The one she actually sent was the 3rd message, which simply says, do what you have to do, and that's it. So in the books, it was actually made more clear that she was hurt by them wanting to sell her racing ship, where in the show it wasn't made as clear. So as much as I like the book's version better, I can see why this was changed for the show. First of all, it made sense to change it to a video message and to have it from her father and not her mother, as her father will become a somewhat important character later on, so it made sense to have this brief scene introducing him, or at least teasing him. And I understand why they need to shorten the message exchange, that they couldn't spend as much time as the novel spent on it. And the scene does convey all the important information about her strained relationship with her parents and her desire to help the belt, so I'm actually going to give this a 0. So then we go over to the UN building on Earth, where we meet Aaron Wright, the UN Undersecretary General, and they even go as far as to give him a subtitle so the audience knows exactly who he is. I'm not sure how necessary that was, but whatever. Anyway, as I mentioned in the novels, Avasarala didn't appear until book 2, which means most people in her storyline, including Aaron Wright, didn't appear until book 2 either. In fact, Aaron Wright was greatly expanded from the books, in which he was mentioned a lot, but barely appeared. In fact, if I remember correctly, all of his appearances was him talking to Avasarala through a video phone or through messages. And just like Avasarala, I thought it was a brilliant part on the shows to expand his character. I thought it added a lot to the story, so +3. Here we see him telling off Avasarala for torturing a belter. Now, we never saw him tell off Avasarala so directly in the books. He more goes about it in a roundabout way and is a bit of a windbag in the novels. But here he's more direct and commanding, and I like this change, so +1. So, as he demanded, she needs to put him into a tank to talk to the Belter, so she does that, and she talks to the Belter, and he talks about the sabotage for some reason where he wouldn't talk before when he was actually being tortured. I don't know why he's talking now, but whatever. So the novels never directly touched on sabotage or acts of terror that the OPA committed on Earth. In fact, the show treats the OPA a lot more like an outright terrorist group than the novel does, which treats the OPA more like a young organization fighting for legitimacy. The acts of sabotage and terrorism come much later in the books and are directed more at Mars rather than Earth, but I'll get into that later on. So I'm not sure how necessary this is. I actually like the novel's portrayal of the OPA better, so -1. So then we go back to the night where Naomi and Amos try to repair the shuttle and break it to Holden that they don't have enough oxygen or fuel left to go anywhere important. Also, the radio is broken, so they can't call for help, so they're basically screwed. Again, none of this happened in the books as they were never in the debris field in the first place. In fact, Holden immediately sends a general message to everyone about the Canterbury being destroyed and them finding Martian technology on the scopuli, something that doesn't happen until much later in the episode. In the novels, the crew discusses where they should go. Everyone has different ideas, but Holden decides to call the home corporation that employs them and ask for instructions, and decides to just sit and wait until they receive a message from them, and the crew listens because they're more cooperative in the novels and not a bunch of douchebags like they are here in the show. So, as I said, I find this storyline an excuse to have suspense in this episode, so -1. So Holden comes up with a plan to go out on the ship and repair the communications array, but the airlock is not intact. It was blown up in the debris field, so to do so would mean venting the whole cabin. And again, none of this happened in the novels. And Amos makes another smart-ass remark to Holden saying, "Oh, there you go again, calling the shots." When, again, Amos never questioned Holden's authority in the novels. But then Shed starts freaking out and eventually yells at Holden not to go out, but then Holden grabs him and tells him that he's in shock and tries to calm him down. Now, Shed never had a specific freak out like this in the novels, but he was always portrayed as someone who wasn't handling the stress as well as the others. There were a few low-key scenes that showed he wasn't dealing with this too well, but nothing as explosive as this. But I actually quite liked this scene, as it was a great way of summarizing how he wasn't taking this well, and made sense that he would go into shock after this emergency situation, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go back to series where we get a scene of Miller and Havelock meeting with a representative of the Earth Governor of Ceres. We never got any such scene in the novels, as this scene was setting up for a storyline with a group of Belter kids stealing water that never happened in the books. But here, Havelock seems to berate the Earth official for hoarding resources where the Belters go without. This kind of resource wealth inequality was implied in the novels, but never shown in such on-the-nose detail. And we certainly didn't get Havelock berating any Earth official because of it. I mean, Havelock in the novels was a good guy, but he towed the line. Havelock here seems like a naive upstart, so overall didn't like this scene, -2. So then we go back to the night where Holden and Amos are on the ship repairing the communications array. Needless to say, not in the books. But here was more noteworthy is Amos and Holden then have a conversation where Holden tries to be friendly, but Amos tells him flat out he has no respect for Holden's authority, and as far as he's concerned, Naomi's in charge. And he even goes as far as to tell Holden that he sees no reason not to rip his head off and throw him into space, other than the fact that Naomi wouldn't like it. Okay, again, Amos in the novels respected Holden's authority, never went anywhere close as to suggesting Naomi was in charge and not him. Sure, he was portrayed as more loyal to her, but here it's like he's has this obsession with her. Moreover, going as far as to say that he'd kill him except Naomi wouldn't like it. Never in a million years would Amos in the book say something like this. And frankly, I think all this petty bickering was just a weak attempt by the show to make it more edgy or to build tension. And I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it works, so -4. So next we see Alex is starting to act all loopy because he's running out of air. When Holden wants to come back in, Naomi doesn't let him because they wouldn't be able to go out and try again. So they pressure Shed to do something to save Alex, but he doesn't know what to do, so he shares his oxygen with Alex to keep him alive. But eventually they both soon run out of air and are both in danger of dying. Holden and Amos then repair the communications array and rush back inside so they can pressurize the cabin just in the nick of time. And Alex is okay, but it doesn't look like Shed's going to make it. But eventually he revives in the nick of time, and Alex thanks him for saving his life. So again, nothing like this happened in the novels, but it is in keeping with Shed being naive, but his heart being in the right place. I actually love this scene because it shows the crew working together to save one another, and the fact that Shed in particular almost sacrificed himself for Alex means a lot. And it makes his death all the more powerful that Alex owes his whole life to Shed, who didn't make it, so +4. So then we go back to Earth to get a scene with Avasarala and Aaron Wright where they discuss what the revelation about what the Belter said about the OPA. Aaron Wright describes Avasarala as being 2 heartbeats away from running the government, but being accountable to no one. In the novels, she does have a lot of political sway and a lot of power, but I don't think she has that much power. Anyway, Avasarala believes that the Belt and Mars are working together on stealth technology, which I like, because it kind of misleads the audience to think that the Belt was involved in the destruction of the Canterbury. Further, it sets up for a show storyline where Avasarala is purposely being misled in order to create tension between the superpowers, which is a nice touch, so +3. So then we get a show original storyline of the crew on the night trying to find the power in order to power the communications array. When Shed talks shit about Ade for sending, logging the distress call, Holden gets all pissed off and threatens to knock his teeth out. So soon after he almost died, I don't know, but whatever. But anyway, Naomi sets him aside and warns him not to unburden his soul about being the one who actually logged a distress call. And I kind of like this, as it creates a nice bit of tension. I like that Naomi actually sets him aside to criticize him for once, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we cut back to Ceres to see Miller and Havelock investigating the water shortage to discover it's being, ciphered off by a bunch of young punk kids. They then go to bust them, and Miller berates the kids for being dumb, as gangsters would be smarter about stealing water and not, jeopardize the entire water supply. And he threatens him with arrest, but eventually just lets him go and tells him that he can get away with a lot of shit. He can pickpocket or whatever, but do not mess with the water. Now, in the novels, no such scene occurs. However, it is mentioned that they take messing with vital supplies like air and water very seriously. In fact, he tells Havelock that they outright space anyone for doing stuff like that. So considering that, Miller was actually being quite merciful here, but the main point remains the same, that petty crime is fine, but never fuck with the vital resources. Now, in the show, this is setting up for this character to reappear later in season 2, but in the novels, that character isn't shown beforehand and is just introduced in that scene. To be honest, I kind of like the callbacks. I think it's cool they're setting up for something else here, but on the other hand, the storyline was kind of pointless, so I'm going to give it a 0. So we then go back to Earth, where Avasarala gets a call letting her know that the Belter prisoner she was interrogating committed suicide on his way to Luna. This wasn't an entirely necessary scene, but I suppose it does cast more doubt on the OPA's involvement with the Canterbury incident, but ultimately I find it a bit unnecessary, so -1. So we then go back to Ceres, where Miller goes down to the docks looking for Julie's ship, the Razorback. Now, I'm not sure what kind of sense this makes. Has he the message that he saw of her father telling her he was selling the Razorback? Now, he may or may not have been bluffing, but either way, the impression that gave was that he was in possession of it, so I'm not sure why Miller thought it would be at Ceres. Anyway, the equivalent scene we get in the books is Miller going to question Julie's karate instructor, who's not mentioned in the show. There, he likewise tells Miller that Julie is a good fighter who can defend herself, where here the dock worker tells Miller that he saw her kick a guy's ass once who was harassing her. However, the main difference here is Miller finds out that she was on the scapulae. Now, in the books, he doesn't find this out until much, much later, and that's because Dawes outright tells him. And at that point in the novels, knowledge of the scopuli being the bait that was used to destroy the Canterbury is common knowledge. Whereas here, that incident isn't even public knowledge yet, and little clues are given to the audience that the scopuli is the same ship that Holden explored before the Canterbury blew up, but those clues are for those who pay very close attention. I certainly didn't notice that from this episode when I first watched it. But overall, I'm fine with this change, so I'm going to give it a 0. So then we cut back to the night where they're discussing the communications device they found on the scopuli and how it is Martian technology. Now in the novels, this is something they figured out when they were on the scopuli. Here, Holden comes to the conclusion that the Martins were behind everything. Alex argues with this for a bit, but eventually they all pretty much agree. Now in the novels, they didn't even have conversations about who was behind it. They simply noted that it was Martian technology. I think they were suspicious of Mars, but they didn't outright say it was definitely them. So I'm going to give this a 0. So then someone finally responds to their beacon, which they're excited about at first, but then they see it's the Martian flagship, the Dollinger, so they assume Mars is coming back to finish the job, and they just gave away their position to the very same people that destroyed the Canterbury. Now, as I mentioned, in the novels, the Knight was never in distress, so they didn't need someone to come and save them. And at this point, Holden had already sent a message to everyone stating that the Canterbury was destroyed and there was evidence of Martian involvement. And they didn't know where to go, so Holden decided to call the corporation they are employed with. When the employers got back to them, it was in the form of a call from the corporate lawyer that was pissed at Holden for sending the message out blaming Mars for the destruction of the Canterbury, even if Holden himself didn't think he was blaming Mars. He just thought he was stating objective facts that they found a device that happened to be Martian technology, but the lawyer was treating it more like he was purposely provoking Mars into a war, and stated that the Mars officials were protesting such accusations vigorously. And so he ordered Holden to report to the Dollinger and cooperate with a Martian investigation to find out what happened to the Canterbury. And further, he declares that if Holden didn't cooperate, they would no longer be considered employees of that corporation and thus would be considered in possession of stolen property, i.e. the shuttlecraft. So there was much debate on what to do, as the crew considered that if they submitted to Mars, they may be tortured or coerced, and some people like Amos wanted to simply go to the belt and hide, but Alex pointed out that evading a state-of-the-art Martian warship would not be an easy task. So Holden made the call to cooperate and set a course to the Dollinger. All in all, I think that the novels did, what the novels did was far more dynamic than what was done here, so I'm going to give that a -2. So we go back to series where we see Havelock take the cactus that he was given by the Earth official and give it to the sex worker we saw in the first episode as a gift, implying that they have some sort of relationship. Now, nothing like this happened in the books, and this character never even appeared again outside of that first scene that she was in, and ultimately I found this unnecessary, so -1. We then go to Miller looking over Julie's files and her dating profile. It was mentioned in the novels that she had a dating file briefly, but that she gave up on it very quickly, and they never really went anywhere with this. And they seem to be making a bigger deal out of it here in the show. Plus, as I mentioned in the previous episode, Musk was not at all involved in Miller's snooping around about Julie Mal. So again, this scene was kind of pointless, so -1. So then we go back to the night where the Dollinger is closing in on them, so Holden gets the idea to send a general message out that the Canterbury was destroyed and the evidence points to Mars involvement, and if they are killed or go missing, it would be further evidence that Mars was responsible for destroying the Canterbury. And while he's making this recording, Naomi and the others start freaking out and trying to find a way to shut down the transmission. Amos even goes as far as to pull a gun on him and asks Naomi if he should shoot him. Why? Why are they so upset? Why are they trying to stop Holden? It's actually a good idea, especially in this case where they're about to be captured by the ones that they assume are responsible for destroying the Canterbury. And I'm sorry, but Amos pulling a gun on Holden, that's just outrageous. It makes no sense. And Amos in the novels would never do this. In fact, Book Amos would kill Show Amos for being such a douchebag. In the novels, as I mentioned, at this point the Dollinger was coming to pick them up. Holden had already sent this message, but when the Dollinger approached, he sent a general message that went out to everyone that said he was cooperating with the Dollinger and that he expected to be treated fairly, to which they replied by saying, "That's fine, but stop sending out general messages." But in the show, Alex points out that the Dollinger was blocking their transmissions, so the message probably never got out, which I don't get why they did this, because we find out in the next episode that Holden's message did in fact get out. I didn't like the way the show handled this at all, especially the part with Amos pulling a gun on Holden, which was ridiculous, so -4. So then the Dollinger grabs a hold of the knight and brings it aboard, and then a bunch of Martian military men storm onto the shuttle, pointing their laser guns at them and warning them if they move, they die. Now, in the novels, them coming aboard the Dollinger isn't all that welcoming either, but they did so voluntarily, so no soldiers stormed onto their ship pointing guns at them. But the bigger point is, in the show, them arriving at the Dollinger happens a lot sooner than it did in the novels. Many events that appeared in later episodes happened in the novels before Holden and his crew went on board the Dollinger, such as Holden being contacted by Fred Johnson, who in the novels contacted him before going to the Dollinger, offering assistance, and he even offered a safe word Holden could use in the future to prove that he wasn't being coerced by the Martians. And in the novels, the knight was being pursued by a group of mysterious little ships in which they had no idea who they were or what their intentions were. They had assumed that they were Belter ships, but they didn't know this. So part of the reason why they went to the Dollinger was to get away from these ships, because they had no idea who they were. It turned out that these ships were from Protogen, and they were the ones that attacked and destroyed the Dollinger once they caught up to them, but the show handles this very differently. You know, I'm fine with that part of it, but I like the fact that Holden went to the Dollinger voluntarily, and there were all these other factors involved. I suppose the show was playing up the fact of trying to fool the audience into thinking the Martians destroyed the Canterbury and now the crew were completely screwed, but I like the complexity of the novels better, so -1. So, the final adaptation score for Season 1, Episode 2, The Big Empty, is a -8. Judging just by this video, some may get the impression that I prefer the novels to the show, which isn't the case. There will be many cases in which I favor the show more, as was the case with the first episode. It's just with this episode, I didn't find it a very good adaptation. In fact, when I first saw this episode, even before I read the novels, this came off as a kind of filler episode. Looking at it now, I think this material was handled much better in the books. In fact, many have noted that The Expanse had some growing pains and didn't do as good of a job adapting the novels in Season 1 as it did in Season 2, and I do think that this shows a lot here. But it wasn't a total wash, as there were some things I still liked about this episode, and as I said, things do get better from here. So that's it for my book-to-show comparison for The Expanse, Season 1, Episode 2. I'll be back for my book-to-show comparison for Episode 3 as soon as I'm able. In the meantime, I do many more videos for many other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Discovery, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.